here. For this week's page, I'm back to Project Life, and I have a page that I'm going to go ahead and tell you the title. It's going to be called Around the House. See the little house? You probably can't figure that one out. And there's going to be a corollary page for this later on where I talk about things that we do away from home, because we did actually leave the house this month. If you've watched my Project Life videos, it may seem like, gosh, these people never go anywhere. But we did get out and about quite a bit here in April, and I'm going to have some separate page and pages about that. But just some of the things that we did at home and some small photos. And the way I did my photos is I went ahead and sent them to a photo processor. I found that is a far less expensive option for me than trying to maintain my photo printer and doing it at home. The drawback to that is that sometimes things like this, and I don't know if you can see from the glare, but some of my words didn't show up because I used a different color ink, and I would just reprint that at home, and I don't have that option now, but I can fix it. I'll show you how I deal with that. But I'm going to be cutting up these different pictures, and I'm going to be putting them around my house. And where my little house is going to come from are these house stamps that we've had before. These are from Hero Arts, but this time I'm going to color them and create a little vignette with the tree and maybe a car or something to go along with those. So the majority of this layout is going to go on watercolor paper. So I have a good coloring surface for the types of coloring mediums that I use. So I'm going to be using some watercolor paper, and then I need some other papers. And this is part of the collectibles collection from My Mind's Eye, and this is a big collection, a lot of papers, and I love it. I went through and picked out things that had the red, blues, and yellows that we often have in our photographs. And gorgeous papers. I don't need very many of them for my sketch. I only need a couple, and I know for sure I want to use this little check because to me it's very homey, and it also goes with some of the pictures, one in particular that I have. And I also really like this wood grain because I also think that kind of gives a home kind of look. So I have a couple picked out, and I'm going to try to sneak in another one maybe before I'm done. And then I have lettering options. If these letters are not too big, they're what I have in mind for my Around the House title. I say too big because I've got this white square is 9 by 9. So I'm going to cut my watercolor paper down. It's 9 inches already. Cut another 9 inches off of it. And then by the time I put my vignette and get my pictures in there, I need to make sure I got enough room. So the pictures could hang over a little bit on the edges. That would probably work as well. So this is my layout for today, and if you were doing something you didn't want around the house, of course you could do, this would be a good travel theme if you had the place that you'd gone to, and then photos of some of the things that you saw, and make a good introductory page. So there's some other things that you could do with this sketch as well. Anyway, I'm going to get started cutting up some papers and laying things out.
Okay, so I have my letters out here and my stamps, and I'm just playing with what's going to be the best arrangement. One of the challenges I have is my sketch only has 7 photos, and I have 11, which is a lot, and I've decided to pull a couple of photos out that are kind of covered in other things and don't really go so much with the theme of this, because it was more about the repairs and then a few other odds and end things that we did here in the early spring. I'm trying a smaller stamp out of that house set, and then just moving the letters about. Thickers don't always stick very well, and sometimes that can be irritating, but in some cases it can be really handy when you want to move them all over the place. And I do the wax paper trick a lot with mine, but in this case I wanted them to be really flexible. So I'm trying around over the house, and I just don't like that. Maybe it's too cutesy, maybe, I don't know. It's just something about it that it's not what I had envisioned. I think that's part of it, is you get a certain idea in your head of what you want, and that's not it. So I want to go back to the taller house, and then I'm just going to need to squeeze a little space in here by putting things pretty close together, and that's okay. I have a tendency to leave my letters a little far apart, so it's okay if they're squeezed in a little bit closer together. And I do want the tree and the grass. Trying a few things with the photos. I decided on the smaller one down there in the bottom corner because I still have a tag that needs to go in place, so I don't want something really big down there. And since I know where the photos are going to go, then I can mark where I'm going to be sewing those stitching lines just with a pencil. And I can erase this later if it shows up under the stitching. And to be sure that I can keep track of the photos, I'm just numbering each photo. So starting up there at about the 10 o'clock position, I put a 1 and I numbered them all the way around and laid them aside. And now I'm playing with papers. I definitely want the 2 papers I showed you in the introduction. It's just the order that I want to put them in. Do I want to put the check on top, or do I want to put the wood grain immediately behind the photos? So that's what I'm playing with a little bit here. And I'm not worrying about the photo order, as I'm just trying to decide which order that I want them in. And I kind of like the wood grain as the frame. So now I'm going to do my stamping. I want to do my stamping before I do my stitching, because if the stamping doesn't work out, I may have to flip the paper over or something. So it's a nice thing, of course, about watercolor paper. You can go on the other side. If I'm doing a detail stamp, I like to stamp on the smoothest side of the watercolor. So that's my first choice. I've created a mask so that when I stamp the tree, it will appear behind the house. And I'm going to do the same thing with the grass. I want some of that grass to kind of be over to the side, and then there's more grass there than I need, so I needed the mask in place. Okay. And I've got this little car. I just haven't quite decided what to do with it. So it's over to the side for the time being. I've picked markers for coloring, and if you watched my video on organizing paper a couple of weeks ago, and I picked out the Stampin' Up! Colors that went with the paper, this is where that comes in really handy, because all I had to do was look at my colors that I had picked out for these papers, and I knew exactly what color markers to pull without having to do any matching. I'm taking the Bermuda Bay marker and I've put it on a block and then used some water to dilute it so I can have a lighter colored house and not be so dark. And then I'm just using the markers to do the rest of the coloring. I'm doing this with the tree. I'm putting color directly from the marker onto the tree, and then I'm going to take my brush and add some water to it and spread that out a little bit. You can do this some with Stampin' Up! Markers. They're not quite as fluid, I don't think, as the distress markers, at least they appear to be. I don't have any of the distress markers, but when I see them on videos, they look like you can really pull the color out with those, because the Ranger products are more water-based slightly than Stampin' Up! But you can do a lot of the same things with Stampin' Up!, and those are the markers I happen to have. For the grass, I'm doing a light green for part of it and a darker green for part of it. I like to mix the grass, it gives it a little more dimension. And now I'm coloring in the flowers on the house. I don't know why a house has flowers on it, but it's cute. And the fireplace, I did the same thing. I did 2 different shades of red to get the chimney. And I decided to go with a brown roof to match my tree. I am not the world's best colorer. I tend to go fairly quickly, although obviously I have the video speeded up here. But my coloring will never be super fancy. I just, I like to do it every once in a while. I think it's fun. And I'm making my door, I've taken red, and I'm also using water on this. And usually when you dilute red, you get pink. So I'm curious what this door is going to come out to be. I'm also adding some color to the windows, just a very light blue. I think that's Baja Breeze that I diluted down just to give a little bit of color to the glass. And I added some green to the house too to match that tree. And then I think that's the crumb cake marker, either that or the Sahara sand marker that I'm going around the windows with. My door did come out kind of pink, and I added another layer to it. It's still kind of pinkish. It fits because our house had sort of a pink door the first few years we lived here. It wasn't the color I wanted, but it's just somehow ended up being a more fuchsia color than the burgundy I had envisioned. Anyway, I've taken my numbered photos and put them back in order, and I have a stitching there. I just did the stitching at the machine, just around in different colors. And I'm going to show you my stitching one of these days. I didn't have a handy, helpful videographer when I did this. Okay, I decided to do mats on my photos, and I find that for these tiny little photos, it's just as easy to glue them down and then use scissors to cut them rather than a paper trimmer. You can get, if you're doing a very small mat in a small photo, you can get it just as even, and it's a lot less trouble. In fact, I think it comes out more even. Now I'm marking my background paper, and I'll do some measuring here to make sure I get that the right size, but I'm going to cut that wood grain paper. I started to dump all the photos off and realized I better keep them in order, because now that they have mats. I'm using a distressing tool on the edge. I found that this watercolor paper was just too white, so I used a distressing tool, and I'm taking some of the antique linen distress ink and going around the edges, sort of between the edge of the paper and the stitching, and that really helped the appearance of it. I think it'll show up more in the last part of the video, but it really did help the appearance. Now I'm trying to figure out how to fit that tag on there, because I had so many photos that I have a lot going on, so I've ended up moving the center section up a little bit. It was completely centered in the sketch, but I'm moving it up a little bit, making sure I have it even, and now I'm going to mark underneath the brown part on the plaid where I'm going to need to cut, because what I do, and I think a lot of people do this, is I cut the middle out of big pieces of paper. This is a small print plaid. It has a pretty small print yellow on the back. I don't want to waste all of that on one layout. And I've got plenty of weight on this layout. It's going to hold up really nicely. It doesn't need the weight of that background paper. So I'm just taking a craft knife and a ruler and cutting out. I don't even always cut it that straight or that fancy, just to get that middle cut out so that I can reuse it for another project. Alright, and I did the same thing with the wood grain there. I cut the middle out of it too. And then I'll glue that down, and I've got a tag that I made a few weeks ago. It was still laying on my desk. Had never been put away. So it's a perfect size tag. I decided to add a little trim to go all the way across, because the tag by itself over there just sort of looked lonely. So I needed some things down at the bottom, especially since I'd moved the design up a bit. I'm trying some buttons to go along with this over on the left-hand side. Tried a yellow button and teal buttons in different sizes, and the buttons just really didn't work for me. So then I went to another embellishment that I don't use very often, these clips. And these seem to work. They weren't round. I've got to put the date in there underneath the house, and you can see that I've done that now. I've added the date with some stickers and just wrote early in by itself. And here's my final layout. I used a smaller number of photos and moved the design up a little bit. Added a little bit of extra journaling on the tag. And the stitching lines, you can see the stitching lines going across. Those clips worked out to add some an extra little embellishment, and I fixed the words that weren't showing up by just printing them out on white paper. I added the little kitty cat stamp. I didn't use the car. I'm going to use it on another layout, but I used the little kitty cat stamp since we have a cat. And this is my final page. Thanks for watching, and please check out my blog for more details, and I explain what that little embellishment or found object there is on the left on the blog post. Thank you again for watching.